You're watching The Week Ahead. We're doing this live. Of course, this show showcases some of the key items that will take place for the first week of October. We've already had the first 3 days of October. It's rather uneventful. But we want to focus on what happened in the previous week so that we can understand what's going to happen in the upcoming week. Our first story will be about the 12th Malaysia Plan, because if you recall, the Prime Minister introduced the 12th Malaysia Plan at the Dewan Rakyat on Monday, basically charting the country's 5 year movement from 2021 up until 2025. This 5 year plan is actually delayed. It was supposed to be introduced last year, but because of the pandemic and all the other interruptions, including that of the political quagmire that the country had to go through, the presentation of the 12th Malaysia Plan was delayed. But it is still a welcoming sight. However, the story is all on whether or not the Bumiputera equity developments is going to be debated, and all the other issues surrounding it. So with 400 billion ringgit allocated for new and existing projects, the country wants to understand a bit better about the 54% bigger than the 260 billion ringgit allocated under the 11th Malaysia Plan. Let's hear the Prime Minister out.
The 12th MP targets a GDP growth of between 4.5% and 5.5% a year in the 5 year period. The plan also pays special attention to closing the income gap and development in some of Malaysia's least developed states, whereby Sabah, Sarawak, Kelantan, Terengganu, Kedah and Perlis will receive at least 50% of the basic development expenditure in the 12th MP. As part of the goals for a high-income economy, the Prime Minister has set a target for the average household income to reach about 10,000 ringgit a month in 2025. That is an increase of around 40% over the current average of 7,160 ringgit. Ismail Sabri said a whole-of-country approach would be needed to tackle hardcore poverty, which the government aims to eradicate by 2025. For that, a special unit at the federal and district levels will be set up to address poverty and income gaps. The Prime Minister also pledged to reduce the intensity of greenhouse gas emissions of GDP by 45% by 2030. The debate of the 12th MP is scheduled to go on for 4 days at the Dewan Rakyat beginning Tuesday.
So this week, we're going to be listening to more of the developments on how income disparity and poverty eradication is going to be addressed, and particularly some of the challenges surrounding these two items, i.e. income disparity and poverty eradication. So last week, Astro, AWANI spoke to the World Bank's senior economist Shakira Sharifuddin on what's in store, what's the strategies that are going to be deployed by the government and some of the key stakeholders. Let's hear the World Bank out.
It has been quite a challenge for them ever since the midterm review in the 11th plan, where we had a change in administration, and now they had the pandemic, and when the parliament was suspended. So to come up with this plan at this current point, I think we should acknowledge that. I think at the broad level, it covers all economic agents, government, households, as well as the private sector, and it also encompasses both the role that private and public sector will play. So there is definitely breadth in coverage.
While the plan clearly outlined the need to address income disparities and poverty issues in the nation, Shakira adds that there is still room for improvement.
It's great that the plan acknowledged regional disparities. It's something that I think we at the bank have highlighted from time to time, that there is a need to look beyond the averages. And the speech that the Prime Minister presented this morning really touched briefly on many parts or measures to reduce that disparity. For example, measures to improve basic infrastructure, whether it's water access, whether it's internet access, whether it's connectivity. Perhaps some of the areas that should be explored in more detail going forward. And again, we will probably hear this going in the near term. Maybe to include laggard regions in Peninsula as well, in Peninsular Malaysia as well, such as the northern states in Kelantan, Kedah, and Terengganu. Another area that could be explored is the deepening of the social safety net, reaching out, for example, to informal workers. And then more needs to be done in terms of addressing and strengthening the social protection system, particularly the fragmentation that we are currently experiencing.
Shakira also stressed the need to come up with a contingency plan in the event of further disasters and uncertainties.
I think what the pandemic has taught us is the need to be flexible and be agile. So I think in this regard, there should be some contingency or at the back of their mind, what should be done or how should they adapt in the event there is another shock coming to the economy and changes the course of the direction of growth. And one way that this could be done is through the mid-term review of the 12th Malaysia Plan.
So, quite related to the 12th Malaysia Plan is, of course, Budget 2022 or Belanjawan 2022. It's going to be expected to be presented in the Dewan Rakyat on the 29th of October, which is about 4 weeks away on Friday, as per normal. And in this round's budget presentation, most probably the Prime Minister will be the one presenting it. And the story is on how he's going to increase the net of protection, particularly when it comes to ensuring the B40 is going to be better protected. And we're going to also be looking at how the M40 is going to be assisted. Remember, Budget 2022 doesn't necessarily mean cash handouts only. It can also mean how the money can be better stretched. So particularly for the M40, we're looking at markers of how cash exemptions are going to be announced, whether or not there's going to be tax exemption, whether or not there's going to be rebates in some particular investments. Last year, we saw how PRS was given some sort of rebates and all that. And of course, throughout the week, we're going to be discussing with a few economists, particularly those from the World Bank and many others. And of course, we have to include some of the consultants, particularly tax consultants, those from PwC, those from KPMG. So over the next few weeks, if not the necessarily few days, we're going to be having a lot of conversations with tax consultants. I personally will speak to Lai Kok, the head of tax of KPMG, tomorrow night, this time on Monday, and we will be discussing some of the tax strategies that are going to be deployed by the government vis-a-vis the Budget 2022. So there's a lot that needs to be discussed. Budget 2022 is not going to be just a particular document to help the government move forward for Malaysia, but it also is a test of how the MOU that was signed between the government and the opposition is going to be done. We've seen less of a squabble at the parliament. In fact, if you've kept your eye on the ball on some of the events that are transpired at the Dewan Rakyat over the past few weeks, you will see a rather cordial debate between the parliamentarians. And we expect these kind of cordial conversations or debate to continue on for the month of October, all the way leading up to the Budget 2022 that is expected to be debated presented on the 29th of October. So those are the kind of items that is important for us to look at. We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about what's coming up in the week ahead. Welcome back. This is The Week Ahead. We're broadcasting this live. We are going to talk about some of the events that are going to take place next week. We move on to the key feature of what's going to happen next week, which is, of course, the vaccination program. In particular, the Health Ministry has given conditional approval for the COVID-19 vaccine made by China's Sinovac to be used on teens in Malaysia. The Health General DG, Tan Sri, Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah, has said that at the moment, CoronaVac is suggested for use amongst adolescents in the country without underlying health conditions, as well as those with allergies and cannot receive the Pfizer vaccine.
Dr. Nur Hisham said evaluation for the use of the vaccine among adolescents with comorbidities would continue once sufficient data was submitted. The vaccine was previously approved for conditional registration for use among individuals aged 18 and above. This is the second COVID-19 vaccine approved for use on adolescents after a similar approval was given to the Pfizer vaccine last June.
Also, related to this is, of course, the announcement that only fully vaccinated individuals are allowed at dine-in restaurants and enter facilities throughout all phases of the National Recovery Plan. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin said that the decision, when it was made, was taking into account the dominance of the Delta variant.
He said that individuals who cannot be vaccinated because of health reasons are required to submit health information that has been verified by a medical officer. He added that the National Security Council would announce the latest details of the SOP in the near future. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry will also allow fully vaccinated husbands or immediate family members to accompany pregnant women in the labour room during childbirth beginning October 4th. They, however, must undergo a COVID-19 screening test within 72 hours, and the test results must be brought along before accompanying the pregnant mother into the maternity ward.
And also, in the upcoming week, we are expecting to see some of the private sector to emulate the public sector services in mandating their staff and stakeholders to be fully vaccinated. President of the Association of Private Hospitals in Malaysia, Datuk Dr. Kuljit Singh, thinks that this would be best to assist in the reopening of Malaysia's economy following the various phases that we have in the National Recovery Plan.
It is important in the private sector, particularly those who are providing service to the people and also those who are working in offices, so that they do not infect each other. And this is the only way people can go back to work and stop this pandemic from going on further. And I think before legislation or there is a mandate through law, I think we all should take the responsibility, even in the private sector, and get everyone vaccinated.
He added that the private healthcare sector, where almost 100% staffs are vaccinated, had used a soft approach to educate the merits and advantages of being vaccinated against COVID-19.
Right, there's more stories in store, but we'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll continue on with the week ahead. Welcome back to the week ahead. Our next story is actually quite interesting because it talks about the announcement from the previous speech made by the Prime Minister, which is regarding the Bumiputra equity. There's some updates because late on Sunday, 3rd October, the Minister in the Prime Minister's department issued a statement clarifying what the Prime Minister meant when it comes to increasing the Bumiputra equity. According to the statement made by the Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Datuk Seri Mustafa Muhammad, some of the items may have been misconstrued by the public. So the clarification here is that it only involves entities revolving around the issues of Bumiputra. And he even lists them, including that of PNB, Tabung Haji, LTAT, Koperasi Police, including that of MARA, Equinas, PHB and PNS, those kind of items. So perhaps that would be some of the context into what we want to present now, because according to ideas, there is an uneven distribution between Bumiputra contractors across the tiers. So over the past week, we spoke with ideas of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs on how the success and failures of pro-Bumiputra policies can be done within public procurement. Let's hear the statements coming in from ideas.
There have been recent initiatives in the past few years, especially to try and help Bumiputra small contractors to graduate by setting a time limit. So we wanted to follow up on that. We also engaged with the data to look at the distribution, where the contractors are located. And I think as expected, many in the smallest G1 category, there are of course many there, but we also found that there's potentially room to grow because there are relatively fewer at the G3 and G5 level.
G1 contracts, the smallest out of 7 grades with contract value of less than 200,000 ringgit, accounts for 63.3% of all Bumiputra contractors, compared to 34.5% for non-Bumiputra contractors. Dr. Lee explains why it is so.
There is still an old guard, right, that are comfortable, that's sort of been they're used to particular ways of G1 where they can go for balloting and eventually you get something, you get the contract that rolls around. There's also the problem of the abuses that was related to multiple ownerships, right, which is against the regulations.
Dr. Lee also highlights more issues regarding ownership and abuses that further hinders the development of Bumiputra companies.
We looked at the implementation and some of the problems there, which I think we were able to confirm in terms of the enforcement of some of the rules regarding ownership and the abuses that do take place, where we have proxy ownership and a lot of amassing of contracts, even though they're supposed to be, one person, one contract. And so I think the issues of enforcement and inadequacies in having a law and the enforcement agencies and mechanisms are also one of the things that we found out.
So how do we resolve this? According to ideas, we should use a point-based system to allow for meritocracy to take place. This, according to them, could lead to better capacity building that could benefit the industry as a whole.
Point system is a proposal in which at every level a new entrant will get a certain number of points, and it diminishes over time, either that or it diminishes with each contract, and there's a flexibility in such a system. So again, it's about giving some incentive, but also that for different pathways, if someone chooses to be more of a generalist, we call it, you could say, or a specialist, there can be modifications, and the emphasis really needs to be on building capacity, on capability. There's been a lot of focus on equity and ownership. I mean, but what needs to drive it, right, is building capability and expansion, right? And of course, other things will follow as well. But what is primary is, again, capacity building.
Also, on top of this, under the 12th Malaysia Plan, there is going to be a policy whereby the sale of Bumiputra shares or companies will only be offered or sold to fellow Bumiputra consortiums, firms, and individuals. Because of this, there seems to be some form of ambiguity into how the proposal is going to be carried out. So the AWANI Tonight team last week spoke to Raja Iskandar Faris from REFSA, or the Research for Social Advancement, to discuss if this measure actually promotes or hinders the community as a whole.
The problem that they face right now, most importantly, is poverty reduction, the lack of economic opportunities. How can they have access to enough funds to acquire such shares or equity in companies? And as many experts have mentioned, limiting the option for shares to be traded beyond just one community, beyond just race, devalues the stock itself, the equity itself. Then eventually it will hurt the community that the policy is trying to help. On the other hand, because there are a certain pool, a small pool of already existing, we can say cronies or connected groups, then there is a tendency for them to reap the benefits of this policy.
Iskandar is of the view that it is time to move away from affirmative action police and focus on measures to promote self-reliance instead.
The bigger agenda, I would say, are two-pronged. One is economic security for all Malaysians, while also empowering disadvantaged groups as a form of economic solidarity. And here, when I say economic solidarity, it has to be expanded than just one community. It should expand to beyond the original beneficiaries of affirmative action to include other disadvantaged groups and economic minority groups. Intervention should be reoriented towards building capacity so that they can self-rely and have a goal of graduating from affirmative action in the future. Ultimately, we need to have empathy for each other and everyone while building consensus on a way forward that can take care of the interests of all Malaysians.
Finally, we want to talk about some of the items that will still be debated in the parliament. And in this sense, we want to talk about sexual harassment because when we speak to Awam's Jernal Tan, he believes that legislations addressing sexual harassment should be put in place with enhanced protection for survivors as the focal point.
The long-term solution way forward would be to pass a survivor-centric anti-sexual harassment bill. It's important that we have a survivor-centric one because our employment laws, for example, has really covered sexual harassment, but it has very inadequate coverage. So an anti-sexual harassment bill has to protect everyone. It has to have a comprehensive definition that covers all forms of sexual harassment, including online, across all spaces. That's very important. Other provisions that should be included include setting up a tribunal, for example, because if you were to go through the civil court now, it's very expensive. It's public, so survivor's privacy is null. It's also basically it's very expensive, it's very time consuming as well. So a tribunal would enable survivor to get redress in a very affordable manner, as well as quick, not to mention survivor has access to a wide variety of remedies. Other provisions also include, very importantly, basically mandating institutional commitment in preventing and reducing sexual harassment. So women currently, one of the crucial reasons why women still, a lot of women experience sexual harassment on a wide scale is because our institutions, not many of them actually have policies that prevent sexual harassment. So when you mandate this institutional commitment, everyone has the responsibility to prevent and reduce sexual harassment. So that's crucial.
Until an anti-sexual harassment bill is passed, Janelle urged for the public to continue speaking up against sexual harassment.
That everyone plays a role in reducing sexual harassment by, for example, challenging myths surrounding sexual harassment, understanding that sexual harassment is not okay. So when more people actually come on board and realize that sexual harassment is not acceptable, that it violates women and recipients' dignity and body, that's when we probably see a significant way forward in terms of reducing sexual harassment until the bill is passed.
So there's still going to be a lot of things that are going to be looked at for next week. Most importantly, Budget 2022 conversation starts this week, and that is the big item or highlight of the day. So keep an eye out for all news regarding Budget 2020. We're going to be presenting all of those kind of items on Astro AWANI. That's it from me. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.